Hello, everyone. It's Paola. Welcome to the channel. And today we're doing an interview with
Cynthia Salaysay, hi.
the author of Private Lessons, a very, very important book. So I will let Cynthia tell you what it is about, and then we'll move on to the question.
Private Lessons is a coming of age story about a girl named Claire who's 17 years old, and she's Filipino-American, and she wants to go to a good college. So she decides to go to a really well-known piano teacher's house to get private lessons. And as she enters into his world, she becomes enamored of him. And what happens is unfortunate, but it's a little bit about like what happens if you decide to date somebody older. It's also a Me Too book too, because there are some very questionable things that happen in terms of power dynamics between her and him.
It's a very, very important book, but it's also quite harsh. So I want to place some trigger warnings for sexual assault and statutory rape. So, Cynthia, my first question is, what inspired you to write this novel?
Well, Paola, I really had a bad experience with a man. I was actually in my late 20s, early 30s, and he was very manipulative, and he was older, and I found myself after we'd broken up realizing how much I had to heal from it. I ended up getting a new job. I ended up moving. I made new friends, and I really became a stronger person from the whole experience. But I mean, one day, I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I'd never really had a story to tell. And then one day in my new apartment, it just started coming. So, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I can write and write and write, and I know exactly what I want to say. And
so why did you decide to make it a YA story?
because I wanted her to be naive and to be believably naive, to be walking in with like all the hope and wonder of like a young, full-hearted person.
Did you set it first in San Francisco, or did you think about Claire first?
I did think about Claire first. I live in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and you know, it was easy to start from where I grew up and the sort of wonder I had when I got to meet new artistic friends that lived in Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco, and to me they had really fancy lives. And I think she's very wide-eyed and admiring and amazed at the way other people, how confident these city people can be. So that's where that came from. But ultimately, I really wanted it to be wherever she was, you know, whether she was at home or whether or not she was in the city, it was really about like how she experienced it. You know, the setting was always to be in service of how she was feeling.
Yeah, I get it, because Claire doesn't live near where she's taking the lesson. She lives quite far away. So that's part of the whole story. Guys, everything in this book is super intentional. So like, read it. It's a masterpiece.
Oh, well, she lives in a very diverse community too. So, like, I grew up in a high school that was 60% people of color and 40% white. And so we didn't really have a lot of otherness because of race. I mean, people could be othered because maybe they were nerdy or something like that. But other than that, like, I think, you know, for me, I didn't realize what privilege was until I left that bubble. So there's a little bit of that in the book as well.
Yeah, it's and it's very clear, but it's not like in your face. My next question is actually the one that I am most interested in. So, okay, this book is very clearly about Claire and her feelings and how she deals with everything that's happening. So how and why did you decide to make Claire the imperfect victim in terms of not wanting to talk about what happened, um, and everything that sort of entailed from her experience with a piano teacher.
I preface this because I think it's important that women do learn to speak out and be strong. It's part of healing, and it's part of our growth, like in terms of the feminist movement, that we feel brave and empowered to speak and to use the systems in place to find justice. But that said, the statistics are that, I read, and there's a study from the Medical University of South Carolina that only 16% of women report their rape. So this is actually, even though she's an imperfect victim, like she doesn't complete her journey of healing by going to the police, or who knows, like, I feel like people's journeys don't necessarily have to come to that. Like, if she feels complete in her healing, then maybe that's not her path either. I think that women should decide, girls should decide what they want for themselves and what's best for them, as long as they can come to peace with themselves and feel like they're getting the healing and love and support that they deserve. But there are reasons, of course, why women don't report their rape. Like, for one reason, some women don't even realize it's happened. Claire's story is very complex. She doesn't really think of Paul as her enemy. Like, he wasn't jumping out from the bushes. He is someone she trusts. And that makes it so much harder and to see these things clearly. Some women don't realize what has happened to them for years until they've gotten some distance or they've grown as people. And some people may never be able to label what happened to them as rape, even though that is what has in fact occurred. So just coming from that baseline of not even, like, some women not even being able to realize what has happened to them, the fact that she has able to label it and find strength, etc., is already, to me, like a great amount of growth. I guess the last thing that I kind of feel like is uncomfortable to say is that I don't think girls, especially girls of color, feel strong in their voices in general to stand up before the world, because there is so much pressure in society and lack of worth that is imparted, that girls absorb simply by growing up in this society. So to come from there and then being able to navigate the police, that sort of thing, it's just, it's a lot. It would take a lot of support.
The thing that I love the most about this book is that it surprised me in how imperfect Claire was as a victim, because in the beginning I thought we were going to get right to it in terms of her beginning her relationship with Paul and stuff, and it takes a while. And I think that's part of why this book is so fantastic and why this book is so important for everyone to read, because it's not something that happens right off the bat. It takes a little bit of time, and it even takes Paul a while to sort of warm up to Claire as well. So on that note, did you have another ending planned, or did you always know it was going to end the way that it did?
I think Claire was going to have some kind of awakening in terms of the power structure of the relationship. I wasn't exactly sure how far I was going to take things and what the confrontations were going to look like, but I knew that Claire was going to come back to herself and feel stronger in herself and feel stronger in her heart.
There was a quote about how her mom was talking about how she should try to go into tech, or to see if a plan B of sorts. And Claire does not want that. She's like, I don't accept the plan B. I don't want to go into tech, because going into tech means failing, means settling for something that I didn't choose. And I think that's super, super powerful, especially for me, because I didn't really feel like I had a choice when I was going into college. And I was basically hopeless in that journey because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I think that was a key quote that I knew that this was going to be one of my new favorite books of all time, because
Oh.
because there's nothing standing between, oh, I'm sorry. There's nothing standing between Claire and her dream. And I think that's something that everyone should take away from this book. Regardless of what your dream is, I think YA stories, depending on what YA stories you read, but I think a lot of YA stories are about characters who will not take no for an answer. And I think this book is extra powerful for that, because Claire does not take no for an answer, and she hurts herself on her search to get a yes. This book is not like about a perfect journey. It's not about like going uphill. It's about the ups and downs and how we recover from those. So please read it. Everyone, please just read this book. It's so good. Another quote that I loved from the book was, I guess you can be talented and still be awful. I wanted to touch on that a little bit, because there's a lot of talk with the Me Too movement, and this is a Me Too book about how some people we see as geniuses can do monstrous things, which is another
Yeah.
thing that I found super interesting in the book. And I think I mentioned it in one of the questions, that Paul says, I'm only human. We never see Paul as not a human being. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
When I was a kid, I would, you know, fall for great talented musician type people, and then I would think that because they were so sensitive emotionally that they could like express all that that meant that they were like moral people that understood themselves and had control over themselves, and was kind to others. They are definitely two different things. To be able to spend 8 hours a day working on your craft does not mean that like you've done the work in terms of like being a responsible human. So yes, he says he's only human, but I think coming from him and what he thinks he's entitled to, and I think that more signifies how little he looks at himself. And also he's given, I feel like when you say that, it's like he's giving himself a pass. It's true, he is only human, and I wanted him to be sympathetic, and I wanted people to see him as a human being and capable of growth. But like the way he says that to me is just like, well, I'm only human. Like, you can say that about so many mean things that you can do. Oh, I'm only human. That doesn't mean that you've examined yourself. It doesn't mean that you know what you've done. Doesn't mean that you're ready to change anything.
Did you incorporate any of your high school memories and experiences in this novel?
Oh, well, I did go to art camp. I didn't go to music school, but I did go to an art summer camp. And there were all kinds of talented young musicians and artists and dancers, and to be swept up in like a mix of artsy people, and to find a part of yourself through that, because you yourself are artistic, and you're finally allowed to like be in your first community of artists.
I love that. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to create such different circles of people to be around Claire? Both her friends from school and the friends that she meets at the conservatory. And why did you make both of those groups like musically interested, musically inclined?
Right. I love music.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted the whole book to be about music, and I wanted it to be about all the different ways that I love music, and I love playing music, and I love listening to music. And when I was a kid, I would dance around in the dark bedroom and like or like listen to music as I fell asleep. And I just had like a very like intimate relationship and like very wistful, hopeful relationship with music. So that I wanted all of that to be in my book, because that's what like music was so important to me as a teen. I think that she needs to grow, and she needs to see more of herself, and to have those two different circles of people, one of them based more on what she grew up as, like the way she grew up, her best friend is a person of color, Her high school is people of color, versus like this other world, which kind of to me represents like the greater world, which
Mm-hmm.
isn't necessarily not diverse, but certainly not as diverse, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly not as sheltered.
That's
Yeah.
also talked about in, it's just, I don't know how to explain it because it's not talked about like in detail, but it's there. And it's something that you need to pay attention to when you're reading this book.
I was really interested in seeing how, like, even though it's not the driving force, it affects her. She starts to see it, and it definitely. I wanted her to feel uncomfortable and to
Mm-hmm.
question her worth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people who grow up at prep schools and with more money, et cetera, they like sort of exude this confidence, and she's sitting there going, "Why aren't I confident like that?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a big question. Why aren't I as comfortable? Like, why aren't I as comfortable or as confident as like a blonde white girl who goes to
Mm-hmm.
prep school?
Moving from those experiences that are not like the driving force onto the things that are the driving force, which is Claire's relationship with sex and her body and her worth. So, why did you decide to include both of the explicit sex scenes in the book?
Mm-hmm. I really wanted to share realistic experiences that,
Mm-hmm.
are sensual, but also awkward and
Mm-hmm.
full of discovery. And there's like beauty in it, but also like shades of other things as well. If you have an experience like that, I don't want you to think that, you're alone in that.
And I think that's another important thing to highlight about the book, because when situations like this come up in the media, people blame the victim always.
Mm-hmm.
And in
Yeah.
this case, it would have been very easy to blame Claire. And even though that's a possibility, both of her friends stand by her. So
Mm-hmm.
do you want to talk about why you decided to create like such a great support group for Claire?
Oh, she needs her friends. We all need our friends. I mean, in my life, I sometimes, if I'm not sure if I'm seeing something right, I'll be like, well, this happened. What do you, this is how I see it. Does that sound like, am I getting that right? And it's so good to have friends that can say, like,
Mm-hmm.
I do think what you're saying is valid.
Mm-hmm.
Friends, like, female friendship is so important. No, to me, no romantic relationship with a guy can replace the need for female friends.
Mm-hmm.
you know I feel like there's like this illusion in our society that, like, a woman gets married to a man, and then like that they're complete and they fulfilled their role. But
Mm-hmm.
like in terms of self-care, women need each other.
Yeah.
Girls need each other.
It's clearly a book about Claire and female friendships. And those female friendships are not perfect, which is another thing that I find super honest of the book and super realistic. But it's about a circle of friends who you need, who even though you don't always agree with, they're going to be there for you regardless of
Mhm.
the situation.
Oh, just remembering to like be loyal to your friends.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but I feel like there isn't enough said about that.
Do you have any advice on how to write about harsh topics?
I think it's important to have sympathy, compassion for your characters, because it is complex. And if you dig into anyone's background, you'll start seeing how society has kind of molded people to be or to act the way they act. So it's not just like, oh, so and so is like a cardboard cutout villain, and this person
Mm-hmm.
is a cardboard cutout innocent. We're all just kind of more complex than that.
Before we wrap up, do you want to talk about your upcoming projects?
Yeah. uh, so I have a work in progress that's taking me forever. And I think partly because, oftentimes these things, like a lot of things are hard to write about, but this one is about family and sisters and sibling rivalry and beauty and difficulties understanding your immigrant parents. So trying to understand where they come from and their style of parenting versus like what you want and what you think should happen. So yeah.
That sounds so interesting. I bet it's going to be just as good, if not even better than private lessons, because that's another thing that is talked about in private lessons, Claire's complicated relationship with her mom.
I never knew I was going to ever publish it, because it's my first book. And I was like, I want to make this everything it could be. Yeah.
I love it. I loved it. I loved it so much. And there are very few books like that one, like this one out there. So people who are watching, please, please, please read this book. I guarantee you will not regret it. But also like be careful with it because it is about rape culture and we have instances of microaggression. So just take care of yourselves while reading this book. In the description below, I will leave Cynthia's links. I will leave the link to the private lessons playlist, which is genius. It's about 3 hours long, so it's perfect for when you want to study, for when you want to focus. Check it out, read it. It came out in May of this year, and it's a very, very important book all about dreams and hopes and coming into one own. Read it, love it, talk about it. Bye.
Paola, you're amazing. Thank you so much.